Thank you for joining me for Session 9 in the Lifeway study, 1st and 2nd Kings. Our title to the lesson is God Provides, and the text is 2 Kings chapter 7, verses 1 to 15. The lesson summary statement is God can be trusted to provide for our needs. I have the means to show the Kentucky Derby race, and I'm going to show that to my class. That's the suggestion in Go Explore the Bible. And then it has questions like, after you show that, why do we like stories about underdogs? And what is your favorite story of an unlikely hero saving the day? And first thing that came to my mind was the movie Rudy. And then I suppose Forrest Gump kind of fits that as well. Those are old films, but your class will have, I'm sure, suggestions that they have. Everybody loves an underdog story. And today we're going to see how God used some unlikely heroes to bring hope to a hopeless situation. The first point is doubts. And I would read or have someone in the class read verses 1 to 2. And then I want to help them to understand the context of why this man doubted what Elisha said. And so I'm going to ask someone to read chapter 6, verse 24 to 31. And there it gives these terrible context. There's a story of this woman that calls out to the king, and what she's complaining about is her and another woman had agreed that they would eat their children. They would cannibalize their children because they were so hungry. She agreed to give her child first, and he was eaten, and now it was time for them to eat this other woman's child. And this other woman has hidden her child. And it just grieves the king. It has things like the cost of buying a donkey's head so that you could have something to eat. And a donkey was an unclean animal, and there certainly wouldn't be much meat to share on a donkey's head. And it was at this exorbitant price. And then it mentions dove dung, and we don't know if it was referring to it being used as fuel or is it being used as food. The scholars go into debating about whether it was literally dove dung or whether it was a reference to a kind of pea that they would eat. And maybe it was something like we refer to hot dogs. Well, you know what that means, and but somebody 2,000 years from now might not really understand what that means. But regardless of those situations, it's picturing people who are desperate, absolutely desperate in their situation, in the famine that's taking place in the city. And so when Elisha says to the king, and this captain is there, in 24 hours, when the sun comes up tomorrow, the city's going to be flush with food. You can understand what he believes. So my question to the class is, what did Elisha believe? And get their answer. And then I want to ask, what did the captain believe? Because you see, his doubts, behind his doubts, there was a belief system. And every time people have doubts, it's because they believe something. And so what was it this man was believing? He didn't believe that God could do this. So what evidence did this captain have that God can do what the king can't do? And we didn't have much time to look at this, but in the preceding events that led up to this, you have all kinds of events that Elisha has worked miracles. Last week we studied about Naaman, and leprosy was cured. There's no case of leprosy outside of Naaman being cured in the Old Testament that I can think of. And it was one of the powerful demonstrations of Jesus that he was from God, that he healed lepers. And so we have that occasion. That was a death sentence. We have the story of the Syrian army that is blinded and led by Elisha to the city of Samaria. And there the army is fed and then sent back home. And there are just all kinds of other stories. There were powerful displays of God at work that could have encouraged this man to believe God can do this. But he wouldn't believe that. The application of this point is on page 91. And the statement for this first point, doubts, is this: doubts in God lead to missed opportunities. That's the truth they're drawing from this lesson point. So, what are the needs that a person could miss out on by doubting God? What are the needs that a person could miss out on by doubting God? Maybe the first thing that comes to mind is salvation. A person doubts God, he'll miss out on God providing salvation for his need. There is provision. This is what the lesson summary statement talks about, that not trusting God, you miss out on God's provision. There's comfort. People who doubt God, they miss out on His comfort or His wisdom, and the list could just go on of the kinds of things we miss out on when we doubt God. So the point is, take your doubts seriously. Examine, what is it that you're really believing that makes you question God can't do that? And that may lead you to grow in your understanding of God and His will. Your doubts could lead to you missing out on God's provision. The second point of our lesson is desperate. 2 Kings chapter 7, verses 3 through 8. And the definition for desperate is having lost hope. And you see that in these men. Again, I would read the text or have some member read the text, and then I'd simply ask the question, what is their reasoning? Why do they make the decision to go? All conversion is born out of bankruptcy. All conversion is born out of bankruptcy. It's coming to an understanding that you cannot save yourself, that causes you to move in the direction of the Lord Jesus for salvation. And I would ask the class, do you have an example of that from your own life? Maybe in your salvation. How did you become aware that you must have Jesus for salvation? Or maybe it's some experience in your Christian life. And if the time is available, I may tell them about an experience I had in Africa on a mission trip in which I was absolutely desperate. And I needed God to help, and He stepped in a very powerful and moving way in my life. It's been life-shaping in my life. Outside of my salvation and my calling, there's nothing been more powerful. But it came at a time of desperation, and it made me go to God. And so that I'm asking for the class to share those kinds of stories. Now, I see this as a pastor in other experiences. When couples get desperate in their marriage, then they find their way to my office or to a counselor's office. Or when people get desperate about a health crisis, they will make lifestyle changes. Or maybe it has something to do with financial matters. When people get hopeless, many times they'll turn to the giver of life. Now, on page 90, the application for this point says this: God provides in unexpected ways. Now, He can do that ordinary ways, or He can do that in extraordinary ways. And so again, I'm going to ask the class, what are some unexpected ways that God provided for your need? And one of the examples that I'll use for my own life is the second church I pastored. There was a man there named Glenn, and he was the wisest man I've ever known. And he understood that I had been wounded and hurt from a previous pastorate, and he was a family counselor for that area. And he would take me to lunch and tell me about counseling situations he was dealing with, and help me to understand how he counseled them and helped them with their lives. What I didn't realize at the time was he was doing that for me. And his work in my life saved, I believe, my ministry. And it was God providing for me in an unexpected way. When I went to that church, I had no idea that he was there and that he would do that kind of ministry for me. And I'm asking the class, how have you experienced a time of desperation and it caused you to turn to God, and God provided for you in ordinary ways or extraordinary ways? The third point is announced in 2 Kings chapter 7, verses 9 through 11. Again, someone reads the text. The application statement for this point on page 90 says, believers have a responsibility to share with others about God's grace. Now, on page 88 in their personal study guide, I'd ask them to turn to that, and it has this question: what are the dangers of failing to share with others the news about God's provision? And again, as I've mentioned in past, occasionally I like to take them and have them be involved in the personal study guide because I'm wanting to re-emphasize and reaffirm the importance of reading that lesson before they come to Sunday school, and that this lesson will give them information that will help them contribute to the discussion and the understanding the text of the Bible. And so, what are the dangers of failing to share with others the news about God's provision? And then I want to ask them, what were the dangers for the lepers? Because the lepers recognize this is not good if we stay here and we don't do something about it. So what were the dangers for the lepers? And then I want to ask, well, what were the dangers for the city? Now, we just read in chapter 6 about this awful story of cannibalization from mothers. And so there may have been a child whose life was at stake. There were these people who were starving and eating unclean food and disgusting things. And imagine that was what was at stake in this city. And so there's great dangers in failing to share with others the news about God's salvation. You might want to look on the internet, something along the lines of how many lost people die every day. And I came across something that said there are 105 people who die every minute in this world. 105 people. How many of those people die without Jesus Christ? There's a danger. And yet God's strategy is so very simple for us. Go and tell. And that's what these lepers do. Now, there are 3 opportunities I'm going to talk to my class about in terms of how they can be a part of announcing the good news. We have in September an evangelistic event called Crossover. I'll explain that to my class and how they can participate. They've been hearing about it already, but I'm going to press the information about the list of 10 people to pray for and sharing those names with us so that people can go and share the good news with them. That's Crossover, Norm. There's a mission trip we're planning to Panama. Maybe some of them would want to go and be a part of that evangelistic effort and sharing the gospel with the people of Panama. There's just simply inviting people to Sunday school. That is a way to get people to hear the gospel. More about that in just a moment. Inside of the personal study guide, I always point out that on the inside cover there is a gospel presentation. And I encourage my class to take one of these and give it to people they know and invite them to Sunday school. Put the name of the church and the name of the teacher of the Sunday school and the times for Sunday school and worship in this book and give it to them. And the book is good enough quality that people won't just immediately throw it away. They'll hang on to it for a little while. And every time they see that, that's an invitation for them to go to church, for them to go to Sunday school. And then their friend has given it to them. That makes it very appealing. But here are just some very simple ways in which you and I can be about the business of announcing the good news of Jesus Christ, because people without Christ are in danger of an eternal hell. And look what they miss out on in life in not knowing Christ. The 4th point is skeptics. Again, I'd have it read or read it myself. And then I ask the question, why does the king think this is unbelievable? Why would he be skeptical of this report that the Arameans have abandoned the camp? And you could go into the geography of Samaria. Samaria sat on a plain, but it was circled by some mountains. And so they could have easily gone behind those mountains and waited till the people came out of the city. He would also think of a story from the Israelite history when Joshua came in to the land. He did that to a nation, to a city. And when the people came out of the city, after they came out, then he rushed in behind them and in front of them and destroyed the inhabitants. So it's a strategy that he would have been aware of. But why does he think this is unbelievable? There could have been as many as 100,000 Aramean soldiers there. So what do we tell 21st century people about our faith that seems unbelievable? And let me just give you a couple of things just to get the pump primed. We tell 21st century people that the Son of God is virgin born. That is an incredible thing. We tell 21st century people that Jesus died and he rose from the dead 3 days later. No human being has ever done that. We tell them this is truth, this is reality, this is not a myth. We tell them that there's one way that you can go to heaven. So what are some other things that you may want to just use one or two of those? We'll ask the class, what are things that we say to people today, and people are tending to be skeptical of that? Well, what convinces this king that it's true? What is it how does the king become convinced this is true? And one of the things that I'm looking for in this passage, and there's a number of things I'm sure we could point out, but you'll notice that it is messengers. It was more than one messenger. Now, one of the things that they have discovered about the development of faith is the way that people come to believe things as true, particularly when at first they're skeptical about it, is when they believe in a community. In other words, if most of the people they live with and hang with, if they don't believe in God, then their tendency is not to believe in God. But if most of the people they are with believe in God, it builds within them an acceptance of the fact that there is a God. So what I'm saying to you is, what is it that overcame this king's skepticism? There were not just the testimony of the lepers, there were messengers that went out and investigated, and they came back and said, it is true. Now that has real value for you and me when it comes to Sunday school. Look at the brilliance of Sunday school. You make an acquaintance, or you have a friend at work, and you begin to invite them to Sunday school. What you're doing is you're seeking to give them a new community, a believing community. And the more that they make relationships and the more they make connections with people who are believing, the more accepting they're going to come to understanding these things we teach about Jesus Christ. Now, maybe you just start out with an acquaintance, and then that leads time to having coffee with someone, or maybe sharing a meal, and then your relationship develops. And as it develops, they're beginning to get new community, and you introduce them to others. I'm just telling you, we have a tremendously powerful tool in your Sunday school class to reach people for Jesus Christ. If we could just get them to Sunday school and love on them and be kind to them and minister to them and just make a friend of them. It is a powerful way to build faith. I've mentioned before, 1 out of every 3 persons who's lost that we enroll in Sunday school will become a believer in 12 months. And there is no evangelistic program that is even near as effective as a Sunday school class that is conscious and praying and reaching those who are lost. Have regular parties, fellowships, go out and eat together as a class after church. Do things like that so that you can include people who are on the outside and watch their faith build. Do you have someone in charge of organizing events like that for your class? What's something that you could do with people that you could include them and invite them to be a part of it? Look at the last point on page 90 for this point. It says people must be given an opportunity to investigate God's grace. And that's what you're doing when you're dealing with the skeptic or the unbeliever and you're bringing them into a community of faith. Now, to conclude, I want to say to the class that trusting God is essential to the Christian life. It doesn't mean it's easy, but it is essential. And the Bible encourages us to trust God because of His character. He's loving, He's powerful, He's wise, He's dependable. There are many character qualities that cause us to trust God. The Bible encourages us to trust God because of His promises, and the promises of God are many. He promises to forgive us. He promises to save us. He promises to sanctify us and make us like Jesus at the end. He promises to provide for us. The promises of God are many, and it helps us to trust God. And we can trust God because of His actions. He promised to send a Savior, and He did, Jesus. And He promised to heal Naaman if Naaman would follow His commands, and Naaman followed His commands and he was healed. He promised these lepers to provide for them, and He did. There are many of the actions of God. So there's God's character, God's promises, and God's actions. All of those things lead us to trust God. If we trust God, we will obey. We will wait when He delays or He remains silent. We will not fear when we trust God. It is an important aspect. It's an essential aspect of the Christian life. And the lesson summary statement says God can be trusted to provide for our needs. Now on the board, I will have written character, promises, and action. And just ask the class, of those three, where do you need to concentrate to learn how to trust God more? On His character, on His promises, or upon a remembrance and thinking through His actions towards us? What a wonderful lesson, a good lesson. Thank you so much for teaching God's Word.